Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Griggs, and I'm the host of the Regenaissance podcast, where I want to talk to folks in the regenerative agriculture space to help explain how we've gotten here and what we can do moving forward in the food system as a whole. And alongside me is Ron Miskin with the Buffalo Wool Company. And this is something that I've been personally looking forward to because I've been really enthralled with bison the last year. That's why, if you look at the shirt behind me, that's the main logo of my personal brand. And so thank you, Ron, for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here. And, I love talking about bison.
Awesome. Well, I guess just to get started, so just from your website mentioning that you've been in this business for 30 or 40 years, I'm just curious to get a little rundown of what exactly the Buffalo Wool Company is and and how it originated.
Well, truthfully, it originated through my father. But I don't come from a long line of ranching people. We moved to Texas in the early 80s. And when you move to Texas, it's sort of required that first thing you do is buy a ranch. We bought some property down south of Fort Worth, Texas, and my father learned that they have these animal auctions every weekend where you can go and buy stuff. We went through a lot of different things, from pot-bellied pigs to miniature horses. We've had pheasants and quail and chickens, and it's been a journey. But at one point, the Fort Worth Nature Center had an auction selling off a little bit of their herd, trying to keep their herd size more manageable. And my father bought a pair of bison. That was, again, 40 something years ago. And the minute you're around them, you're just awestruck at their majesty, and you understand that they are an apex species here. They are just part of the land, and they are so natural and they fit so well. And I don't care if you're in Minnesota or New Mexico, they work and they do better for the planet.
So I guess my next question, with that being said, I know you mentioned that he started with a couple bison, but I guess can you just get a little detail of why they're so amazing for our environment? Because when we think of ranching, we think of, when I say we, a lot of the general population just think of cattle, especially with Texas, or sheep and lamb and goats and chickens. And I know bison in the 1800s, there were millions around, but now it's much, much less. So yeah, I'm just curious why bison.
Well, the reason why bison becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly. You look and see what is native to our land, what kind of shaped our environment. And bison is the apex species in this country. And because if you start with the top, it's amazing. If you fix the big issues, it's amazing how it just trickles down, and all of a sudden everything else sort of falls into place. There's reasons why other things are more commonly ranched. I mean, certain things grow faster and we'll just sit there and eat. Certain things are more manageable. Certain things can be stocked in a larger density, can get to market faster. Bison aren't easy. But with proper management and at least a little understanding of just letting them be bison, it is easy and it does make sense. And more ranchers are converting herds. And I've seen since we got into the industry, seen a massive resurgence in people understanding and figuring out how to provide the land, provide the resources that the animals need, and make it simple, smart, and healthy.
How much land would, if someone is wanting to be thinking about starting a ranch for bison, how much land would you need for that?
That's a really good question. Any stocking rates, you can usually go to your county extension agent and find out what your stocking rate, the number of animal units per acre, is in your area. Obviously, better grass, more grass year round, the more animals you can have. Around here, they say one animal per acre, um, which would essentially translate into one bison. It's pretty much equivalent to a cow. Personally, I think that take the official stocking rate and double it, or double the land required. So I wouldn't have more than one animal per 2 acres around here. And it's preferable and less stress on the land if you can reduce that density even more so.
And then I guess I'm really curious too, because they're completely wild animals. I remember the first time I saw them actually at the National Bison Association conference this past January. I agree. They're completely majestic beasts. Very, it makes you just stop in your tracks. And I can only imagine what it's like trying to take care of them. So I guess that would be my next question. How are you able to manage them with just say you and one other person? Just trying to detail that out, what that would look like whenever you're starting the ranch. Say you have a couple acres and you get two bison, because I know bison, whenever they're only by themselves, can cause a lot of problems. So you'd want more than one. Is that correct?
It's very true. I mean, and when we talk about raising bison, you talk about the couple of things that are required. Water, okay, that's pretty obvious. Fencing, because they are big and they do like to roam, solid fencing, and company. Um, they are a herd animal, and if they are not kept in a family unit, they'll go find one, which means that whatever fencing you put up doesn't mean anything because they're stronger than almost all of it. So keeping them happy is huge. And one of the things that they talk about with bison is that you can follow them anywhere. It's not like handling bison. I feel like is not like cattle where you can push them, corral them, move them. With bison, make them want to do it, give them incentives, lead them with feed, things like that. That works really well. But again, these are undomesticated animals. They're not meant to be held in a pen, held in a chute, and things like that. So there is a little bit more to working them. And I'm going to be just straight up. I don't have bison here on my place because I don't quite have the land for it. I have 5 acres, so I have a few cows and chickens and turkeys and pigs and bees and stuff like that. If I could have 50, 100 acres, we'd be having a little bit different story. So I don't want to
Hmm.
give specifics because that's really not what I'm comfortable doing.
Yeah. So I'm
The
curious
National
then.
Bison
Oh,
Association, um,
no, you can go ahead.
the National Bison Association has a wonderful mentorship program. Basically, if you're interested in raising bison, the first thing to do is I'll put you in touch with somebody in your area who does raise bison and has a little bit more of the specifics. And, I can't tell you how many times we've gone out and helped other ranchers work. And one of the things in our local the Texas Bison Association here is if we do know that we're going to have a work day or something where we're going to have to run them through the chutes or load or what have you, you put out a phone call and it's amazing. People show up, they want to help. And that just makes it safer for everybody involved.
Hmm. So I guess for the Buffalo Wool Company, for example, yeah, I guess what's the process like for all of that? So do you just source from a different bison ranch?
Um, well, we work with most of the bison ranchers in the U.S. What we do, our primary product is the bison fiber, the hair. And it's when you start looking at all the parts of the animal that don't have a commercial value, that's kind of how we discovered the fiber and looking at the historical uses and the actual just physical properties of the fiber, we realized the value to it. But trying to make things commercially out of any sort of animal fiber requires a fair amount of volume. The bison industry is extremely collaborative. Everybody is very happy to work together. We realize that it is not competitive and that we're never going to replace cattle with bison as much as we would love to. So people are very willing to work together, and there's a lot of that goes on in the industry. So because we are willing to put some commercial value to the hair, whether it's through the hides or shearing them at the plants, things like that, um, everybody's been really supportive and wonderful, and we get money back upstream, helps make the animals more valuable to the ranchers, and all of a sudden, you know, the more commercial value, the more likely they are that somebody's get into the ranching industry.
That was one thing I noticed whenever I was at the conference was how collaborative everyone was and very welcoming environment. So I guess I'm curious then with that whole process, what are some of the key bottlenecks within whether it be just ranching or ranching the actual bison or if there's any regulations because I don't know a whole lot of behind the scenes with bison. So yeah, I was just curious about that.
Um, there are, truthfully, the biggest bottleneck really is experience. You go back 70 years and there were 4 people with bison ranching experience. So because of these associations, both the National Buffalo Foundation and the National Bison Association, there's been a lot more people that are willing to share experience, help mentor and teach, and show that it can be successful on a commercial basis. So I guess in answer to your question, yeah, it's we're still growing, but trying to get these animals to market it does have its other challenges. They're not regulated the same way that cattle are. They are still classified by Fish and Wildlife as a wildlife species, and there is not the same sort of labeling and inspection process by USDA that there is for beef. So the National Buffalo Foundation has done, and the Bison Association have both done an amazing job working together to try and make it a little bit more make sense in terms of a commercial basis, in terms of putting meat on shelves, in terms of having the same labeling requirements, and making people understand that that these aren't wild ant herds, that these are commercially raised, and that they are, not endangered anymore. Even though the bison were never on the endangered species list, when we started doing this and showing that you can really eat them to save them, there was a lot of people that are like, well, aren't they endangered? Aren't there only a few? And it's like, well, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And in the, you know, years that we've been in the industry, we've watched the national herd size go from, under 100,000 animals to pushing up closer to a 500,000 now. And we've got goals of 1 million animals by 2025. That's truthfully the greatest comeback in history.
I agree. And I guess with that then too, because I know you're talking about the National Bison Association with the mentorship piece. Are there any other ways that you could see helping trying to push that goal of achieving the 1 million bison?
Um, well, it's really getting more ranchers on board is one of the bigger aspects of it, because what it comes down to, every rancher anywhere is essentially a grass farmer. Okay, so that's where it all starts. And if as long as you're growing grass and putting animals on it, they eat the grass, and that's how it goes. So converting more of this, our prairie grasslands and things like that, to bison will increase the species. There is sort of bottleneck with birth rate, and animals only have one calf a year, so you're limited in that regard. You have to have some stewardship in terms of how much are you going to process and how much are you going to put into the market. How much is growth phase and how much is profitability, and that's been something that's been a very well analyzed and I think pretty well stewarded question over the years. The growth has been significant, but it can't go exponentially. You can't just order more bison.
Yeah. So I'm curious then, with the startup cost of a cattle versus a bison ranch, but then also I guess if you were to go to auctions, what are the costs like when trying to buy a bison versus just a cow?
Again, a question without a simple answer. Yeah, I've watched the market just bounce all over the place. I mean,
Mm,
when we were starting out, they were under 50 cents a pound. And I've seen there's been spikes and dips in the market just based on supply and demand. And that's how it all goes. In terms of being comparable to cattle, bison are typically more expensive. Currently, the market price of beef on the rail is getting much closer to the price of bison than I've ever seen. So, bison is definitely a premium product as far as meat goes, but beef is getting stupidly expensive. So, six of one, half dozen of the other. I do think that in the long run, the animals are much more profitable from a ranching standpoint. It does take slightly more investment in terms of infrastructure. You really need better than average cattle fencing, to raise bison. I think that's a safe and responsible way to do it. Um, and overall, I think it's really getting to know what you're willing to do and what kind of product you'd like to produce as a rancher. If you want to put out the best quality product you can, you go one direction. If you just want to throw meat, put animals in a box and throw meat in the freezer, it's a different direction.
I'm curious then, you were saying long term it has the potential to be more profitability, higher profitability. I guess can you elaborate on that?
Well, again, it's a superior product. I mean, if you've had a bison burger, if you've had a beef burger, and if you do those on a continuous basis, you really start to understand that the bison is A, better for you, and B, better for the planet in terms of the long term. Not having to with farming, one of the things that does add a lot of expenses is putting inputs back into the land, whether it's fertilizer, whatever. With bison, they do a much better job of maintaining your grasslands and not depleting the soil as much as dense cattle operations do. So if you're looking for something that's going to have a long term benefit to your property, bison are a pretty obvious choice.
And with whenever I guess observing bison, because their grazing patterns are they cover much more land than cattle, especially if you think about the Great Plains areas. They're running from the furthest north point all the way down to Texas. Whenever trying to manage um, your own land with bison, and I guess when thinking about fencing and all of that, how do you strategize around that? Because they are wild and they could easily mess up your fence, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess if you could just shed
Well,
light on all of that, because I know, I guess for example, I was supposed to be on a bison ranch, but I had some health issues, and I know a lot of what I was going to be doing was just going around making sure all the fencing was up correctly.
um, as far as grazing operations, the best scenario is mimicking the natural roaming patterns, is letting them intensely graze one piece of land, move to the next, let the first piece of land rest and recuperate, and just keeping them moving. So, like on our ranch, we had 40 something acres, but we had it split into five different things, so they could move from one section to the other, and you kind of let them move freely, but you do sort of not sort of you do manage it. You do have to actually keep them moving so that they do have access to fresh green stuff, and then you also have to give the land some recovery time. And those native grazing patterns, where they did swoop down through the country and back up, mimic that as closely as you can on your own property, and that will that will improve your land.
How long for example, for those 40 acres with the five different paddocks, how long would you allow the bison for one paddock before wanting them to move on?
It depends on the growth rate during that time of year. So when you've got May and June and grass is growing, at a quarter an inch a day, they can stay in one area longer. You get towards later periods of the year where the grass is recovering slower, you kind of have to move them a little slower and use a little bit larger pieces. So it's not just a set a clock and move the bison at 12 o'clock type of situation, or move them every 3 days. You have to look at the land and understand what's actually happening.
In the instance where I guess overgrazing happens and the bison, I don't, just some mistake was made to where the bison stayed in the pack too long and definitely overgrazed. How do you manage that uh, for the future? Or yeah, I guess how do you fix that per se?
Again, part of the reason that people raise these animals is because they do help regenerate the soil better. So keeping them in too long, they're not going to eat the grass to the ground. They're not going to pull the roots like other animals. So they really, I don't want to say they won't overgraze, because if they're hungry, they're going to eat what they want. But, they're also going to put more deposits back into the land, which should help the grass grow back faster. So again, you're asking great questions. And if I was more of a direct rancher myself, I would probably have some better answers. But I'm kind of giving you the broad strokes type type answer on these. But that's a good question, and I think maybe that what we can look for in the future is, let me bring a couple of rancher friends and have a little, maybe do a panel with you for people from
Yes,
different
that
regions and things like that, because I think that will get you better ranching answers than I can give you. I mean, I can speak specifically towards north central Texas and a smaller piece of property, but I've got friends that have, 300,000 acres in North Dakota. Very different strategy on that. Um, One of the things that we put together the bison handbook. We call it Producers 101 that has a lot of really good answers that if you are specifically thinking about converting your ranch to or starting to raise bison, that would be the first place I would start is the handbook. And second, again, talking to ranchers in your local area.
So is that handbook on the Buffalo Wool Company website, or is that somewhere else?
If you go to bisoncentral.org or bisoncentral.com, actually, that's the National Bison Association's website. The book's available on Amazon. I think I'm pretty sure we have it on our website also. I want it in anybody's hands who is interested.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I guess to transition a little bit and just talking about the history of bison, because in the 1800s, millions roamed everywhere. You could hear herds running from a mile away, which trying to visualize that is just crazy to where um yeah, I guess I'm just curious to hear your perspective on just the history of bison and why they were just so beneficial and so crucial to where we had the most fertile farmland in the world thanks to them. I didn't know if you could go into more detail of just the history of them, and yeah, just how they interacted with our natural landscape and improved it so much.
Okay, well, again, they are what formed our landscape. I mean, this planet was really shaped by the bison, the herds of bison roaming across it. So everything that we had, whether it was the native prairie grasses, the birds, all of that was dependent on the apex species. They were the top. With our grasslands, that anytime that you have you we're growing all of this grass, this cellulose, and the only time it actually can be regenerated and put back into the soil as nutrient, it pretty much has to be done in a warm, moist environment. The only place that is in a lot of places is in the ruminant of a large ungulate, such as a bison. So that's just part of the cycle. I mean, grass grows, they eat it, poop, and it goes back into the soil. That's basically how our world has evolved. When we killed off of all of the bison towards the end of the last century or the century before, we lost a lot of that. Hence, we had things like the Dust Bowl and watched all of our soil depleted. And that's when we started having to add all of these artificial inputs and fertilizers back into the soils in order to actually grow anything. So as we heal our land and bring these animals back, you start to see, the biodiversity coming back. And it's amazing how every little bird, bug, and critter plays some part in keeping the land alive. And again, that's the reason why we started with the bison. It's the top. You fix those big problems, and it's amazing what happens on smaller problems. We're doing that, my wife and myself, here on our little piece of land, to some degree, trying to not use chemical fertilizers, not use pesticides and herbicides, and see really what actually happens. And it's been an experiment for myself, but it also provides our family sustenance. And it's been a really amazing adventure watching that happen. So,
So at the start you were using those chemical inputs and then slowly weaning off, or I guess could you talk about that process?
no, we really didn't. We bought this land just prior to COVID. We had a little house in the suburbs. We spent the prior 10 years on the road out there talking about bison, hawking socks, and showing off our products and visiting ranchers and things like that. It wasn't until we got here that we decided that what we're going to do with this piece of land is run it naturally. So it's not that I was a farmer before. I wasn't. It wasn't that we did any of the other stuff before, but we do watch a lot of people around here who spray grazon on hay, who use, the glyphosate and things like that in their soils. And truthfully, our place looks pretty. We've got the birds, the bees, the bugs, and everything out there growing, and it's made a huge change, I think, to this property.
That's awesome. I guess to transition a little bit to I guess just the after the actual ranching and the bison, and you've got, I guess, how to formulate this question. I guess can you explain your process then? You've got the bison, and then how does that look to turn into the wool socks and hats and all of the awesome products that you have?
Okay, well, let's back up just a little bit. Looking at this fiber, and when we started with this, this was originally started as sort of a challenge from the National Bison Association to see if somebody could find a way to help raise the value of the animal. You raise the value of the animal, you make it more attractive to and commercially viable to raise, more people will want to raise them. So it was my father who looked around and had been picking up shed bison fiber around our ranch because they grow this undercoat. It's our primary product. They grow it out in the winter and then shed it out in the spring. And we'd pick it up off the fence and blackberry bushes. We'd watch birds using it to line their nests. But Dad would pick it up and it's pretty. It's really soft, very fine fiber. He'd throw it in a box in the barn. And one day when that challenge came out, he put that box on eBay. And a lady in Boston and a lady in Colorado started bidding against each other. And all of a sudden, this 4 pound box of nasty, dirty buffalo hair was over like 500 bucks. And you're kind of like, okay, what am I missing here? And that's really what started the deep dive into looking at this fiber. Um, if you think about the environment that the animals live in, their native rangelands can hit temperatures anywhere from -60, -80 up near Delta Junction, Alaska, Coke, and places like that, to up to 120 down past Mexico City. So they're really well adapted to a lot of varied climates. Mother Nature does a good job of taking care of its own. This fiber is really well adapted to keeping a large mammal comfortable in a wide range of temperatures. So now that we understand that this fiber is extremely efficient, they don't have much of it on their body. If you stripped all the down off of a bison hide, you're going to get less than a pound. And
Wow.
then we wash it and scour it. And you don't get very much, but it really works well. So it doesn't take a lot to keep a 120 pound, 140-pound guy warm compared to 2,000. The way we started originally picking it up off fences and blackberry bushes, we started putting street sweeper brushes, the big plastic bristle brushes, out on fences on ranches, and letting them comb themselves off and collect it that way. And then realizing that these are meat animals and these are going to processing, and instead of burning the hair off or using chemicals to wash it down the drain, that if we can shear these hides, add some value back into it, then we can collect a lot more. So again, it's really goes back to that whole belief of using every part of the animal, and every part does have value. So that's sort of how we got started. The next step from actually collecting it is processing. Processing it a couple of stages. First, it has to be scoured or washed. Bison don't have any lanolin, or they don't have sebaceous glands, so they don't have any body oil on their fiber like sheep do. So, but it's a very crimpy, fine, dense fiber. That's why it's so insulating. But because it's very fine, crimpy, and dense, it also traps dirt. So it's got to be washed really well. You don't really want a sock that smells like a buffalo. So we scour it through a hot water, natural soap process that actually gets all that dirt out of it and opens the fiber up. And then we have to sort and separate the guard hair, which is of course crunchy stuff, which is like if you look at the bison hide, that's the majority of what you actually see. The down fiber is very short, very fine, and down close to the skin. So there's machines that have a mechanical separation method, somewhat like they do with cashmere, that separates those fine soft fibers from the coarse one. We separate this into two different categories, and then we have to spin it into yarn. And spinning is a little trickier. It's a shorter staple fiber than most sheep's wool. So it takes a little bit more calibration and experience to turn it into a yarn. We do blend it with some other things because they bring different properties and it helps adjust the value. And then it can be knitted into things. And we're committed very much to working here only in the United States. This is not only our national mammal, it really represents our country. And in addition to trying to improve the land, we're trying to improve our production capacities. What's happened over the last 30, 50 years is we've lost a lot of experience in textiles, mills closing, equipment getting shipped over to China, and losing a lot of the knowledge that we've had over the years on how to actually make stuff. So that's been a whole separate journey. I just got back from, this weekend, I was up in a mill in Wisconsin spinning some of our yarn right now, doing an amazing job. But they're working with machinery that was built in 1916. Um, it's, and it still is, does as good a job today as it ever has, and it makes some amazing yarn. So then after it's blended and spun into a yarn, it has to go and be knitted. The majority of our knitwear is done down in Austin, Texas. We've got a really neat Scottish guy down there who's just wonderful, and he has these very technical automated knitting machines, and he can just make them do just about anything. If you look at most of our products, they are actually seamless, which is very unusual in textiles today. Most of the stuff, they knit big sheets of things and cut it and sew it. With a standard beanie, it's knitted like a big long tube, and they chop it into lengths and then kind of sew a beanie out of it. Ours are all one piece crafted, so
Hmm.
it just makes them better and fit better. But yeah, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and because I can't just order fiber like bison fiber like I can wool, we have sort of a bottleneck in terms of how much we can ever make. I said we've been in business as the Buffalo Wool Company since 2011 and as Buffalo Gold since about 2005. And as of now, we have sold out every single year that we have made.
Wow.
It's limited. I mean, again, we're not working with hundreds of thousands of pounds like you are. We are sheep,
Hmm.
but we've brought more people into the fold. We have more friends and partners, and every year our production has increased. This last year, we went from I think the prior year we did about 10,000 pounds. I think we're going to probably hit about 25,000.
That's awesome.
That's a big jump.
Yeah. Well, because
But the
I mean
demand's
that's just
there. People realize it works.
hmm. Cool, because it makes me just think about. I mean, a huge resurgence right now, especially with cattle, is just seeing so many tallow products, and so it's awesome to hear just the process of how you're making everything with bison and not just utilizing bison for meat, obviously, but there's other things because it's interesting. Their fat content is way lower than beef, so having tallow and bone broth is much more difficult. So I'm curious, are there other creative ways to utilize a bison for different products for humans outside of the fur and the food?
Um, well, I mean, you look at what a human or what any animal actually needs, and it is sustenance and shelter. And whether that shelter is clothing or housing or what have you, um, bison provide pretty much everything somebody needs. And again, it was literally the Walmart of the plains for the Native Americans for centuries. We are doing a lot of tallow products of our own. We have everything from skincare products to bison tallow candles, which are pretty amazing. It's
Huh.
when you just start realizing how well these things work compared to the synthetics that we've sort of engineered to replace them, um, it's pretty drastic. And again, this is all very basic stuff. It's not rocket science. It's not something that mankind hasn't done forever. So there's nothing done that's really revolutionary. We've just sort of modernized a little bit things that have happened. But we're getting pretty close to, I'm going to say that out of a commercial bison operation, 95% of the value, 95% of the animal is being utilized. There's very little actual waste. Some of the things that are a little unusual that you don't necessarily see when you go to our website is the coarser crunchy fiber we use in a number of ways because as volume, it's significantly larger quantities than the down. We make a number of felt products. Our primary one is bison felt boot liners. I cannot tell you how popular those. They're crazy. They work really well. It's springy. It's bouncy. It insulates. It wicks moisture. We've started making a lot more bedding. We make comforters and pillows stuffed with bison fiber. Again,
Huh.
it regulates temperature. It's not like memory foam that off gases. I mean, you think about sleeping on a memory foam pillow and you're breathing in polyvinyl chloride gases all night long. So coming back and using things that aren't toxic is huge. So the more we learn, the more we're able to find partners to help us with construction, design, development, and production, the more we're able to get this to market. The Buffalo Wool Company is essentially me and my wife, my sister-in-law who works for us, and my granddaughter. So we contract out most of our production with other people who are doing things, looking at the different aspects and new avenues. Well, sometimes you kind of have to find somebody new who wants to play with something, and then all of a sudden you have a new product line. Got something working on mattress covers at the moment. We do a lot of soil amendment or garden underlayment. Um, Things that, again, putting those nutrients back into the soil and helping, put out a natural weed block, things like that. We put out bird nesting material because when the bison were roaming the plains and this fluff was blowing everywhere, the native ground birds, the quail, the pheasant, the prairie chickens, had something they could use to line and insulate their nests. You get rid of these bison, and all of a sudden you lose the ground birds. You lose the ground birds, you lose the bison. And it's all so interconnected. And it's, once you kind of take a step back and look at it, it's really obvious and makes sense. But I hope that answers the question. Went on
No,
a
that
bit.
was great because I have 2 points from that, I guess. So the first one in relation to the ground birds, do they get the nesting through wallowing when the bison do that, or is that just as they're just walking and their hairs fibers fall off?
A little of both. I mean, again, this fiber, it grows out starting in the fall. And so by the time winter comes around, they are fully haired up, as we call it. And then come January, February, when they don't need this fiber, it breaks off at the skin surface and starts to work its way out. If you've ever seen them like in the parks or anywhere where they start looking dreadlocky and shaggy, it's this fiber coming out. So some of that comes out when they're wallowing, some of it comes out when they roam in the trees, and some of it just falls out later because it dies. So it's just part of a natural cycle, and there's not one specific thing that mitigates it or instigates it.
Well, that makes sense. And then the second thing I had with that was I wholeheartedly agree with your comments about uh, the memory foam pillows and whatnot, because when starting this apparel brand, that really opened up my eyes to just the natural fibers versus all the synthetic materials and how toxic all that is, especially inhaling all of that. And so that's why it's awesome talking to you about this process of the Buffalo Wool Company, because we need more and more natural fibers coming back into our apparel. I mean, for example, just with organic cotton production, only 0.2% of the world's production was here this past year. And so, yeah, that's just really great that you're doing all this stuff because
It
I
is,
don't
and
think a
and
lot of
I've
people
got
are aware.
it is, and I've got one friend who's very much a naturalist, and he's been pushing me to come up with 100% natural sock. And it could be done. I mean, we've done it in the past. Mankind has, we didn't have nylon, 200 years ago. But because we have some of these modern innovations, and some of them are actually useful, technology has done things to improve our lives. But there's got to be a balance. And so I will get people that want 100% natural sock, and I'm kind of like, it's not a good idea necessarily. We have ways to make it better. There are, elastic and spandex and nylon can be wonderful for reinforcement tools. And then using the natural fiber where it touches your skin. It is amazing how many people just pick up a sock and look at the back of the package and say, well, this is only 70% natural fiber. And then you try and explain, well, yeah, we do use these technical fibers for, under the ball of the foot, up the back of the heel, and things to make sure that this sock that you purchased will last a long time. But just going off straight percentages also is really misleading because the synthetic fibers are significantly heavier. For every 7 yards of bison yarn, I get about 1 yard of nylon. So, that in terms of volume is hugely different, even though the sock by volume might be 90% natural fiber. And sorry, that's just another another one of those rabbit holes. I do think
Mhm.
that some synthetics have their value. I typically wear a nylon shell shirt every day, but I wear a 100% wool shirt underneath it next to my skin. Nylon's great at repelling water and better for abrasion. This protects the natural fiber. So I do think that there is a balance in finding things that work for you and things that aren't necessarily toxic to your skin that you're not going to be absorbing, you know, versus wearing a polyester undershirt or something like that. Or there's balances in all this. I'm not going to go out and live in a cave. I'd like to, but probably not going to do it.
I mean, that's a great point.
Trying
I
to be
guess
realistic.
can with you were saying how the placement of the nylon, because I definitely look at the percentages too, and this is a great point that makes me kind of rethink a little bit about that. I guess can you go into the details of what you're saying, where you place the nylon? Is that not
Yeah,
touching
and
the
I've
skin?
got a couple of good explanations of that on our website and things. But when we make this, when we're designing a sock, okay, and I use socks because it's the majority of our volume. We make what we call a base yarn, and I make several different base yarns. One is a bison and merino wool, one's a bison merino and bamboo, one's a bison and silk, and one is pretty much pure bison. Um, So the body of the sock is really designed from that. And then we use a process called overplating, where basically stitches are knitted on the outside of the sock to add that reinforcement. And I mean, you can look at any of our socks. I try to make it very clear. I don't try and hide where the nylon is. We use a contrasting color so you can tell. It's pretty common in the sock industry. You can really tell where the reinforcement is. Then you take the sock and turn it inside out, and you'll see that you're not going to see any of it there. You know, there might be a little bit of stitching show through, but truly very, very low percentage will ever touch your skin.
That's good to know. That's really good to know because again,
Yeah,
I've been
it's
in the
one of my
way
pet
to
peeves as a sock designer. People come in and
yeah.
first off, they flip it over. And I'm like, well, yes, I agree with you that you don't really need, nylon, up and down your pulse points. But, we do this for a reason. Again, there's a balance between being a realist, being a naturalist, and being, an absolutist. I don't think that being an absolutist is possible. I have a very interesting customer who's posed a challenge for us to make that 100% sock. And I want to because he will not accept anything else. But I also have to deliver a product that is going to work, last, and be of the value. People work too hard for the money to spend something on, anything that doesn't work and deliver.
No, I agree with that. I guess my last question I have with this talk, I guess just based off the discussion and with the awesome trends of where bison ranching is headed towards, with the awesome goal of 1 million bison by, you said 2025 or 20.
Yeah, it's been pushed back a little bit again. We've had a couple of setbacks the last few years in terms of restaurants closing, which were a larger volume of meat. In obviously we've had some challenges the last few years, um, but we're not losing sight of reaching that goal. When we get there, nature's going to dictate that.
I guess how could we, for the younger generations and younger audience, with just the advancing of technology and social media and TikTok and all of this, I know you've mentioned the mentorship, but are there other ways that you could foresee just trying to get them interested in this whole world of bison? And because for me, for example, I
I'm going to
I
share
had
with
four.
you a project.
Oh, so go ahead.
All right, this is something that you know came up with my daughter the other day over coffee, and I've had a few conversations with some important people about it, and it hasn't really been made public yet. But there's no reason to hide. Here's my next plan. It's just I'd like to see a McBison burger. I'd like to see the world's largest restaurant chain put bison on the menu. It's going to have to be limited in scale and scope for now, regional, seasonal, what have you. But the more we can reduce the barrier to entry. Right now, I'll be honest, I don't know where you live, but do you think you could go within 5 minutes find a bison burger?
Well, I'm in
Most people
Austin,
couldn't.
Yeah. No, most people can't, but
Maybe
yeah.
you can. Yeah, most people in general can't. So the easier you make it for somebody to actually try something and see for themselves what the value benefit is, then all of a sudden you've gained exposure, you've increased awareness, information, and knowledge. So this is my new windmill that we're going to go tilt at. I'm going to try and pitch McDonald's to put a buffalo burger on the menu.
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, that's a very good point because what I was going to mention too, I was up at Whole Foods in Austin and they had a mini freezer of Force of Nature meats and I saw bison. I was like, huh, I don't know if I've ever had bison or when the last time I was. I bought it and then I ate it. It was great. And then started doing research online and just went down the rabbit hole of bison to where I went to the National Bison Conference and now I'm completely obsessed with them too. So I wholeheartedly agree
That's
with
awesome.
that.
All right,
Well, that's
I'm going to give you a challenge. Have you been down to Rome Ranch yet?
no. I signed up for their bison harvest in January.
Okay. Never. We just had one bison harvest at Riffle Ranch in West Virginia. Taylor and Katie Collins, who are Rome Ranch Force of Nature Meats, they're the ones who
Hmm.
started Epic Provisions and the
Hmm.
Bison Meat Barn. Absolutely phenomenal folks, much better spoken than I am. Um, their story and their journey is fascinating, and what they've done with their piece of land. When they sold off Epic Provisions, they had some money. They took it and put it where their mouth is and bought Rome Ranch down just outside Fredericksburg, Texas. It's phenomenal. It was a beat up, worn out dust bowl. They put out chicken trackers. They put bison on the land, and it has flourished. We just had a conference down there in June. It was great. Joel Salatin came down, and oh, it was spectacular. They did a bison butchery demonstration out in the field. Um, Wonderful folks. So I'm excited for you and the roast out there, and we'll probably be down there. I hope you're coming to the conference again in January. Always an awesome time.
Yeah, I saw that the tickets aren't for sale yet, but I've had that on my radar too. I'm for sure going to be there. I guess with that being said, do you have any last comments or anything that you'd like to talk about that hasn't been discussed?
Absolutely. I would really like for people to check out Native Prodigies of an Icon. It's a movie we've been making for the last 2 years, and it's Charlie and Shauna Rankin are the actual filmmakers. They're out in North Carolina. It started with a discussion Charlie and I had. We saw him. He has a YouTube channel that's phenomenal. And we started talking about bison and the fact that there's never been a real documentary done from a producer's standpoint. So he's incredibly detail oriented. The guy does his homework, and then he doesn't mind getting his hands dirty and getting on the ground. So as of now, he's done 70 travel vlogs. He's interviewed at 70 ranches, and I'm not sure exactly how many are out yet, but I do know that between now and the end of the year, there are 30 more of their hour long travel vlogs of these ranch interviews. But go watch the initial trailer. He's just released a new trailer last week. There's, I think he said something like 6,000 hours of footage done of bison all across the United States, all across Canada, um, from every park, preserve, ranch he can meet with, talk to. It is the most comprehensive look at bison ever. So
Awesome. And can you repeat that again to where the listeners could go?
the trailer is on YouTube and Rumble. The name of the movie is called Native Prodigies of an Icon.
Native Prodigies
The
of Icon.
channel is Yanasa TV, Yanasa TV. Uh, Go watch them. It's so much better than listening to me talk about them. The footage is spectacular, but it's a lot of people and a lot of people who have been instrumental in this greatest comeback ever.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. And you can find Ron on Twitter at Buffalo Guy Ron and also his website, the Buffalo Wool Co. Thank you again, Ron, for joining me.
My pleasure, Ryan. Thank you, brother, and take care. And I'll see you in January.